This is Ask Joe 230.
Hi everybody, welcome to Ask Joe. My name's Joe Gilder from Home Studio Corner, and we do this every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Central. That intro brought to you by Boys to Men, who would have done it much better than I could, but what do you know? So I'm going to be drinking out of this thing a lot, not because they're a sponsor, that'd be kind of funny, but because I'm all like messed up. So I'm probably going to cough a lot. I'm probably going to sniff a lot. If that annoys you, you should probably skip this episode. But otherwise, I'm going to try to make it as valuable to you as possible. So that's what I'm going to try to do. I don't really have a topic for today. I wanted to kind of just jump in and answer your questions, because that's really what this is about. I like to do a little rant at the beginning, but a lot of times, sometimes I just want to start with your questions. But I will really quickly talk about the importance of changing stuff. Of redirecting. So you may see in the chat, Homestead Collective is here. That's Ben and Caitlin. And if you remember the song Fool's Gold that we mixed together, Ben and Caitlin were in that band, Sunday Muse. So that was Caitlin's vocal that you heard and Ben's guitar. But they have their own duo thing now, and it's awesome. And I was texting Caitlin earlier today, because we're going to try to do some shows together, or at least a show. And we finally landed on, we're probably going to do a house show here in Nashville in May, but we're going to have Ben and Caitlin here, 1 p.m. on a Tuesday, May 29th or something? And so they're going to play some songs. We're going to play some music and answer a few questions. But I was telling her, I bet we have a lot of people who have questions about doing the whole musician thing and booking gigs and all that entails. And Caitlin's response was, I don't know if she wants me to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. She said, I don't know what I'm doing. I just throw a bunch of stuff out there, or some, I forget. Hang on, how did she put it? She said it really. What'd she say? I told her she's a master at it. She says, literally making it up as I go along. Which, on the one hand, you might say, well, that's not a very professional answer. And I would say, what are you talking about? That's what we're all doing. And I think where we get stuck, so many people want to figure it all out beforehand, and then once they have it all figured out, then they're going to dip their toe in the water and experiment. And as someone who makes a living selling tutorials to teach you how to do things like audio and mixing and EQ and compression and all that type of stuff, it's probably counterintuitive for me to say this, but all the learning in the world isn't going to make you better unless you compare it with just diving in and just making a mess of things. I was reading something recently that talked about if you're wanting to kind of take your whatever you're doing to the next level, you got to kind of essentially bring problems to yourself. You got to create new and bigger problems. And problems, it's code word for opportunities. So if you're only dealing with small problems, or I had somebody leave a comment on YouTube, I saw it earlier today. I'm not going to find it. It was something like, I've essentially made my life completely free of frustration. And it was a video I posted, I think it was end of last week, about songwriting and how, if you're having a hard time with lyrics, it's probably a good idea to keep some sort of a journal where you just every day, just a few lines about kind of what's going on, what are you feeling? Because a lot of great music comes out of those emotions, and you kind of build from there. And this person commented and said, I've freed my life of all frustration, so I'm going to have to study other people and write about other people's experiences because I don't ever have any real deep emotional experiences. And so my initial thought was, your life must be so boring. Or if not boring, you must be so secluded and alone, because if you're not in, if there's no conflict and there's no frustration, then you're probably not in any relationship. Not romantic, just anyone. You probably don't really have a lot of friends. You probably don't do any sort of work that's super fulfilling, because to be fulfilling, a part of it has to be risky. And you're certainly not putting yourself out there and challenging yourself, because challenges are inherently frustrating. And I've been through seasons where I want to sit and do the comfortable thing. I'll read these books about authors, people who write books, and they'll say, I just want to sit in my little cave for 8 hours a day just writing. And that's the secret to becoming a good writer, is to just sit and write. And I connect with that on one level of like, yes, do what you were made to do. But on another level, it can be you spend all your time writing, but you don't actually spend any time marketing your work or making connections with people who can get you a book deal or interacting with your fans, or all the things that go into being successful in a field because you found the comfortable thing to do. So I just want to encourage you. I'm just thinking about things that I've gotten myself into in the last couple of weeks where I throw a bunch of stuff out there and then I realize, ooh, I've created a lot of problems. I got to kind of adjust and maybe cancel this thing and do this thing, but it's all worth it in the end. Boom. That boom snuck up on me. I feel like, no, it's about right at 5 minutes in. Those booms are sneaky. Ben and Caitlin, I'm going to try to get y'all to, you're going to have to talk into the boom. Because, so when you do a podcast like this, if you were smart, you'd have someone else there. And you would probably also shoot everything and then edit the background music later. But I don't have time for that. So as I'm like streaming to you on the YouTubes, I'm recording the video, and I don't want to go back and edit because that takes a long time to render again. So I'm literally like, that's why I put the audio in place, and sometimes I move it around so the cues are there while I'm recording so I can just export and be done. Anyway, that's way more information than you wanted to know. Time for your questions. So if you have a question for me, I want you to leave it in the comment here. If you're listening to this after the fact, you should really show up Tuesdays, 1 p.m. Central. I know that excludes people, but it's just the way it's going to work. So I'm going to answer your questions now. Let me make this chat box bigger because I like it bigger. Come on now. Come on now. I think I'm getting older. I can't see the chat as much as I used to. That's sad. All right, Caitlin and Ben are going to practice the boom. Good. I want, like, seriously, 20 times a day, you're practicing the boom. This is from Sick Boy. What's up, Sick Boy? I'm recording my first mixtape. I want it to be as perfect as possible, but I want to know if I should record at a studio or at home. I don't make much money, so studio time is hard to come by. I'm going to answer your question with something you're not going to want to hear. Your first mixtape is not going to be perfect. Just go ahead and lay that out there. Not because I'm sure you are amazingly talented and it might be great and it can certainly be something you're proud of, but your perfect project is like 3 years from now. So I'd say just do it. If on your own, if you don't have the money to hire a studio, do your thing in your studio, and it's going to take a while to learn how to do that and do that well. But don't wait until it's perfect to put it out. Go ahead and put this first one out. It'll have flaws. You'll look back on it in 3 years and say, I'm really proud of what I did, but what I'm doing now is worlds better. And the only way it's worlds better is because I put that one out. And then I put another one out, and another one out, and another one out. There's this thing about repetition plus learning and getting better at your craft, but you can't do one without the other. If you repeat without learning how to get better, you just repeat the same mistakes. If you only get better or you only learn about technique, but you never do the work, then that doesn't help either. It's this 1-2 punch. I'm not a boxer, but 1-2 punch. David Kim, what's up? David says, how do you edit out mouth and spit noise in Studio One? I know Pro Tools has that pencil tool, but I can't seem to find anything similar in Studio One. That's interesting. So if there's like this weird mouth clicky noise thing, one cool thing about Pro Tools is you could zoom in with a pencil tool and you could redraw the waveform so that spike goes away. It's kind of creepy how well it works. I don't know of anything that'll do that in Studio One. What I've done is I'll zoom in as far as I can go, and it's usually only a couple of samples because it's a really quick thing that happens. I'll just take that and I'll find the beginning of it and the end of it, and I'll cut it and I'll mute it. And if that causes a weird click, I'll mute it, I'll delete it, and then I'll just slide one piece of audio next to it over, and that usually works. And maybe a crossfade, or maybe just finding a zero cross point where the two files line up and playback over both of them doesn't cause any sort of popping. Yeah, so I don't know if that's how I've done it before. Granted, don't be too obsessed about those things. If you're only hearing it with the soloed vocal, not a problem. If you're hearing it in the final mix and it's bothering you, then sure, go ahead and try to deal with it. Any good 11 rack tips? What's up, John? Especially using the Studio One. Well, I use it as like an outboard piece of gear, so I just run cables out of the back into my interface. As far as tips using it, use it like a real amp. I spent a long time trying to crank up like the Fender Bassman model to get the sound that I wanted, only to finally realize what I really wanted was a combination of an amp that's maybe breaking up a little bit and then some sort of overdrive pedal going into it. That was the tone I was looking for. I couldn't get that with just the amp by itself. the tone I wanted in my head. Not saying you can't get a good tone that way, but for me, it was finally realizing if I even treat you like a clean amp and run pedals into you, you sound pretty stinking cool, which is how I run my deluxe reverb over there. Sometimes I just set the 11 rack to the deluxe reverb model because I'm too lazy to go put a mic on that amp. So that's probably not something I should announce. Tim E. What's up, Tim E? Nashville number system. What do you use to ID progression? Bass line, vocal melody line. You don't. Well, you do the bass line. You don't do the vocal melody. It's not a replacement for a chart with a melody. So the Nashville number chart that looks like... Hold on, I got one in here. If you've seen me do, I've done videos on it before. Let me find one real quick. It's essentially for the rhythm section. It's for the band. So it's going to tell you what chords to play when. So play a 1 chord for 2 bars, and then play a 4 chord, and then a 5 chord. That's literally all it's for. So here's one I did for a thing the other day. I don't know how well you can see that, but it's just a bunch of numbers. It looks crazy. I show it to my wife, like, can you read this? And she said, that looks like hieroglyphics, and she's probably right. But it doesn't denote melody or anything like that. You can tell the bass what to play. So if I want the bass to stay, let's say the chords are going 1, 5, 4, and we're in the key of E. So it's E, B, A. And maybe I want the bass to just hang on an E the whole time because this is cool, vibey thing. Then I would say 1, 5, over 1, like a fraction, 4 over 1. That's a way to tell them. As far as like, hey, walk up here and things like that, there's something you can do a stair step that means walk up. I don't use that kind of stuff too much. I like to leave them room to like, hey, play what you want to play, but here's the structure of the song. Here's how many bars you play this chord, so on and so forth. Ola, do you recommend the PreSonus fader port for Logic control? Yeah, I think it works well with Logic. Someone else can confirm, but I love this thing. At this point, there's newer things that are prettier, but sucker's just great. And I don't use all the buttons. I use probably like 3 buttons in the fader, but I love it. How do you generate or come up with arrangement ideas? I get a lot of ideas from listening to other music. So, for example, if you haven't seen The Greatest Showman, the movie, I had super low expectations. It's really great, and the production is really good. My whole family, we're obsessed with the soundtrack. Listened to it 100 times. But there's lots of cool little production things they do in there that I listen to and I like. And then I was working on a song in the studio. I was telling somebody this morning. I'm working on a song in the studio earlier, I think yesterday, or last week, and I wanted to do this cool like reverse cymbal reverb sound that I remember kept hearing in the Greatest Showman soundtrack. So I popped it in and made that sound happen. So yeah, a lot of ideas come from listening to other people. One cool thing, shameless plug, listening to other people's raw tracks is really educational. So if you're not a Dueling Mixes member, or if you don't own my mix practice, so homestudiocorner.com/practice or duelingmixes.com, you get access to a whole bunch of multi-tracks of different songs, and just pulling them into your session, even if you don't finish the mix, paying attention to what tracks are there, what parts are being played, what instruments are in the arrangement, is really educational. I've learned so much from mixing other people's stuff just in what they sent me that gives me ideas for things I can do in my own productions in the future. Ashwin says, what's your opinion of 5.1 surround sound music? I think it's cool. It's not practical for most people. If you're doing sound for film and that's like the game you want to get into, then yeah, you got to have a 5.1 system. Or I guess there's enough people with surround sound systems in their house that they may want to listen to surround, but it seems like that's a film thing. So if you're going to do film, great. If you want to set it up in your home studio, it's just, at that point, it's a little more gimmicky, I think. Not gimmicky, it's not useful because people are going to listen to your music on these things for the most part, and that's just left and right. I'm not against surround. I just don't focus on it. John Wymore. Wymore? Because. Joe, can you give a couple of examples of how you use your ADL 700 to sculpt tone on the way in? Like, what do you do with your vocals, any compression or EQ as you record? Yeah. When I'm recording myself, I don't do a lot because it's really hard to turn the knob and listen at the same time. I may record it, listen back, turn a knob, record it, listen back, but that takes time. So a lot of times for that, here's a good example. When on my EP, the Fighter EP, there's a lot of beatbox sounds in there with the drums. So I start off almost every song with boom, boom, boom. Well, when I was recording that, I was using, I think it was the SM7, and I had it going through the ADL, and the boom, boom, boom sounded like that, boom, 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 instead of whoom, whoom. So I knew I could EQ it later, but I thought, let's go ahead and get that sound a little closer to how we want it to be. So I just cranked the low end on the ADL, and it became huge and beefy, and that's a big part of the sound. And then compression, I'll use compression when I'm tracking vocals on it, just to even it out a little bit. It'll still need compression in the mix, but one thing I have done, you may remember, early last year on the first EP I did last year, Someone to Blame, I had the snare running through that, and I compressed it too much, and I didn't realize it until after the session, and I ruined the snare and my life. I'm kidding. I didn't ruin my life. Did ruin the snare, though. Man, some cool names coming through here. Gernot Reininger. Greetings from Austria. I really enjoy watching your videos. Well, thank you. And I'm sorry that I just butchered your name and you'll never watch another of my videos. Ong Sithu, do you use DAW monitor for your track or direct monitor from the interface when recording? Interesting question. So you may have seen this giant mixer over here. So this is my interface, and it's also a digital mixer. So I actually listen to everything off the board, which means in Studio One, if you look, hold please. You see how there's this little button right here on my vocal? That's the monitoring feature. So I can listen to the vocal that's being recorded, but if I click this, listen to what happens. You hear this latency because my vocal is being processed through the computer and then coming back out. Now I can lower the buffer and get that down to pretty quick, but it's more taxing on the computer. And then when I go to mix, I got to change the buffer back. There's just, for me, with my system, there's no point because I can just listen, like you're listening right now, directly off the board. So there is no need for software monitoring in that scenario. I also, like we did in the intro, I can do reverb on my vocal from the board too, so I don't have to use plugins for that. So it's mine's a very unique or specific situation. If you don't have this board or a board like this, then you probably do have to do some sort of like hardware monitoring, whether it's some sort of like software like the Universal Audio Apollo stuff where there's like a mixer that's software based but it's running on the interface instead of going all the way through the computer, so you can get low latency monitoring. There's lots of solutions. I like the mixer version because I don't have to use any other software. I can just hear it right here because it's plugged right into it. How do you like the central station? Love it. Ruben says, I recorded live drums with 2 mics because that's all I have. Way to go. How would you go about mixing the one overhead mic that's picking up everything? The kick has its own mic. Well, I think you picked the 2 right places to put it. One overhead, one kick. Hopefully you put the overhead in a spot that gets good snare sound and big drum sound in addition to the cymbals. And I would just, the good news is you just don't have a lot of options. So I would start with the overhead and I would try to make it sound like a full kit. So probably remove some mid-range, 400 hertz. Depending on how the cymbals are, I want to hear a lot of snare in the overhead. So you may need to tame the cymbals if they're too loud. And then probably compress it, just like I would compress a drum bus. Just in this instance, you just got one track, or you could run both kick and that to it. And then I treat the kick drum the way I would normally treat it. But I would start with the overhead, get that sounding as amazing as possible, even in the low end with a kick. Then when you add your kick to it, boom, should be huge. Check the phase. You only have 2 mics, but if the kick is out of phase with the overhead, when you bring the kick in, the low end's going to sound bad. If you flip it, it probably sounds better, just depending. One way will probably sound better than the other, so make sure you check that. Yohei. What's up, Yohei? How do you record solo acoustic fingerstyle guitar? Pretty much the same way I record any guitar. I usually put the microphone... Okay, that's not true. I put the microphone closer, because if the microphone is like a foot away, I'm going to have to crank the volume to get a decent signal. And then that's going to mean it's going to pick up, there's going to be some preamp noise, and it's going to pick up a lot of just the room sound. None of us are in a perfectly treated, isolated booth. So I try to get closer. So sometimes I'm, a couple inches away. That way it gets a nice big low end. It's here, it's catching all the detail, and there's not a ton of room sound. Just keep in mind, there's going to be just room noise and noise in general for a lot of fingerstyle guitars. I've heard major label releases that have it. Stuff that I've done have it. So what I'm basically saying is I'm as good as a major label. I'm kidding. If you go listen to the Homestead Collective, they're here. Their EP, the Christmas one, I know it's not Christmas, but just go listen to it really quickly. There's a couple fingerstyle songs that start with just one guitar, and Caitlin was playing really quiet, and we have the mics on there, and it sounds fine. It's just got a little bit of noise, because that's just what happens when you do fingerstyle guitar. And you know what? I don't hate it. It sounds fine. It sounds real, honestly, and I love it. Hey Joe, can you make a video on what to have in a professional studio? See, that's the thing. You might be new, Grigory Andre Popa. I think the only thing that it depends on what you mean by professional. I think if you're making music that sounds professional, you can do that with a laptop and an audio interface and a $300 mic and a set of headphones and talent. So, yeah, I don't think I'll do that video. You can see my studio tour video and see what I have. I think my studio is professional just because I make music and people pay me to do it. So that makes, to me, that makes it professional. But there are lots of really, really nice studios that also sound amazing. 4 mic drum recording techniques: kick, snare, overheads. Yep, that's what I would do. Kick, snare, stereo overheads. Or kick, snare, overhead, and room if you're in a room that actually can give you a cool room sound. I would maybe also trade one of those overheads for like the trash mic. If you haven't seen my trash mic video, go watch it. And then slam that sucker with like a distressor or some sort of compressor plug-in. How do you know when to stop mixing? Ooh, good question. I did a series of videos and also a guide called 5-Step Mix. Go to 5stepmix.com. It's a little 7-page thing. It talks about that in the final step. You got to just set some boundaries. Because in reality, you could take 19 years to mix that song if you let yourself. At some point, you've got to just, if you're slow, it's fine if you're slow, but set some sort of, I will be done by this date at this time, or I will be done by the end of the day. And then force yourself to work. Your brain will do these cool things when you give it a boundary. It'll actually adhere to the boundary, or it will try, and you'll be thinking of different things. So if I've got to finish this mix in an hour, I'm not going to spend 30 minutes tweaking the EQ on the shaker because I don't have time for that. It tricks your brain into focusing on what's important. Okay, are the levels okay? Yeah, the vocal needs work. Let me fix that. Okay, the drums need work. Let me fix that. Okay, the bass isn't quite right. Let me fix that. And that's you're kind of in that mode. That's how I like to mix all the time. Not always with an hour deadline, but with a fairly short one. This may be an amateur question, but when are the times to EQ before compression? Good question. Rule of thumb for me: if I know the track needs compression, and the track sounds pretty good to me already, I'll compress it first. Then see what that does to the sound, and then EQ after. If I hear the track and the first thing I think is that needs EQ, I'll put EQ first, and then if it needs compression, I'll add compression. Basically, I'm usually, if it needs EQ, I'm taking something out. There's too much of something. And then once I take that out, it's a more balanced sound, which will behave better in the compressor, normally. Ong Sithu. Man, there's a lot of people here today. Don't you have somewhere better to be? I'm kidding. I'm really glad you're here. Do you compress distorted guitars? I don't usually. I may compress the whole bus so that, like, in general, louder and quieter sections are a little more even. But distorted guitars are compressed. Distortion is kind of a form of compression, right? If you look at the waveform, it's all one big rectangle a lot of times. So you don't get a lot from compressing it. Certainly try it. You may find something cool, or maybe the compressor adds a little different kind of distortion that warms it up. I mean, that's totally legit too. When is your new EP coming to Spotify? Remember at the beginning of the podcast when I talked about how you have to step back and readjust? I'm in a period of readjusting that EP. I've got some other things that are more important. So TBD. That's a bad answer after I just answered someone to set deadlines and set an end date. I am terribly hypocritical. Johnny says, I'm trying to learn to mix, but how do I get better? Don't really know a lot about sound engineering. Couple things, Johnny. You need practice and you need direction. So if you came to me and said, I want to learn how to shoe a horse, I would first put you in touch with someone who shoes horses, and then I'd probably have them teach you how it works, show you how it works, and then have you do it a lot, and hopefully not get kicked in the head. So mixing's a lot less dangerous, but you need those things. So I do a lot of tutorial videos. There's some for free. There's a series called Mix Together. There's 2 seasons on my YouTube channel where you can download the tracks and mix the song, and then I mix the song start to finish on YouTube for free. That's a great way to do it. And then I've got some other courses that'll teach you how to use EQ, how to use compression. There's a course where I mix and master my entire last EP, 4-song EP, start to finish, and you get those tracks as well. That's a paid course. So there's some combination of find some training and then just put in a lot of practice. You kind of need both. I know it's a very self-serving statement, but if you don't know how to use EQ, you could use it all day, every day for a year, and you may not be any better than when you started because you need to kind of know what direction to go. Like if I sat you in an alien spaceship and said, practice flying this ship, but you never knew how to turn it on, you'd sit in the ship and try for a year and nothing would happen. So that's a weird analogy. Spaceship. I think it's the cold medicine. Or it's this water. Music theory versus software technical skills, like EQ, plugins, modulation. How to balance the study to become a great producer. I don't know if I think music theory is so fascinating, and it's beautiful. I loved when I studied it in college because I had a music minor. Would I say I use that knowledge on a day-to-day basis in the studio? Not really. I use my musicianship, which is based in music theory, and I use a lot of music theory to make that number chart that I showed you earlier. I would say if I had to pick someone who's very musical and someone who's very technical, I'm going for the musical person because that person thinks creatively and they'll figure out a way to make the tools make the sound that they want. I've known too many engineers, both live sound and studio, who know all the technical knowledge. They could tell me how this compressor works, what the circuitry is inside, what albums it was used on, the best settings that were used by the best engineers in the world, but they've never actually released or produced anything that I like to listen to. It's especially common, like, I'm not trying to be negative. If you go on like a forum and people are giving out advice, occasionally the people who give out advice, you can't really go find anything they've worked on. Or if you do, it doesn't sound that great. So you have to take that with a grain of salt. Like if you're listening to me, I don't expect you to just believe me just because I'm wearing a Sweetwater t-shirt and I have a YouTube channel. You should go listen to stuff that I've done. So if I show you a trick in the video, listen, does it sound good to you? And then go listen to my music on Spotify. Does that sound decent? Am I someone you want to listen to? If you hate my music on Spotify, you probably shouldn't listen to my advice on YouTube because that's kind of what I do. So to me, you got to know the technical stuff, but the musical stuff to me is far more important. People don't love the Beatles because because of the technical things they did. They love them because of the music. And then they use technology in a fun, cool way. And, they took over the world. Y'all are talking about a lot and I can't keep up. Nathan says, any tips on literally just starting out? Like I don't even have an interface. Anything I definitely should do or not do? Any horror stories or great triumphs? Really interested in this stuff. So you don't even have an interface? I'd probably start there. I've got a series called 12 Home Studio Necessities. It's a YouTube. Go check under playlist on my YouTube channel. I'd go through those. It's not that you have to have all those things, but it kind of spells out the things you might want at some point in your studio. The biggest mistake you can make is spending so much time researching and so little time doing music. It's not a tragedy. No one blows up if that happens. But you need to be making music. So if all you have right now is an iPhone, get GarageBand. Go watch Graham Cochran's video. He did a whole song in GarageBand using the built-in microphone. And it sounds amazing, and it makes you want to punch yourself in the face because it's so good. There is never a good excuse to not be making music, okay? There's just not. So if you're saying, I really want to make music, but I got to get this, just stop. Imagine I'm there and I just kind of I'm not going to hit you, but I theoretically smack you around and say, hey, you need to be making music. And it's not about making me happy. Like, it's not about me. You want to be making music, and there's fear there. Because what if I make it and it sounds bad, or someone says I'm horrible at it? That's a legit fear. But you'll never get good if you don't make the music. You can always improve. You can always upgrade your gear down the road. But just make music with what you have right now and keep doing it. That's the way you get better. I'm going to keep saying it till I kick the bucket, but that's the secret. Let's see. Is the Mackie Big Knob a great investment? I'd prefer the PreSonus monitor station. I had a Big Knob. It has a lot of different amps inside of it, and it was just turning it on was noisy. So I prefer like the PreSonus. Obviously, I'm biased. Did you teach online private lessons? I can. There's not a great way to do that where you can hear good high-quality audio, but I've got lots of things I've done, so hit me up. Let's talk about it. What are your thoughts on top-down mixing? I like to call it backwards mixing, and I'm out of time. See ya!